This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and I'm with Alex Coley, who's one of the candidates for the forthcoming Police and Crime Commissioner election on May the 2nd. Alex, welcome to the Guildford Dragon.
Thanks, Martin.
So, why do you think you would make a good Police and Crime Commissioner?
Well, I've got experience of policing. I was the first head of digital at the Met Police. I'm also working as an independent advisor to the Met Police on conduct vetting and culture right now. So I know quite a bit about how policing works. I've been on the Surrey Police and Crime panel for the last year, holding the PCC to account and taking the time to understand quite a lot about the finances and some of the questions around performance that have come up at that time. I'm also chair of my borough's Crime and Disorder Committee. That's at Epsom and Ewell, and I'm a member of the Epsom and Ewell Community Safety Partnership. So I've got quite a bit of experience. I understand the role, and I've got my views about what would be good for policing in Surrey.
Okay, now I should have explained in the intro that you're standing as an independent. That's correct, isn't it?
That is correct, yeah. And I'm a Residents Association councillor and standing as an independent in the PCC elections.
So you're not carrying that membership of that group forward into this election, is that correct?
This is just pure independent. There's no affiliation with any other group.
Okay. So do you think that there should be a police and crime commissioner? Because some people, even some candidates, think that it's not a good idea to have this role. What do you think?
Well, I'll work within the framework that I have. As to what I think should be there, if I were PCC, I'd be working a lot more closely with the Police and Crime Panel, which has legislative scrutiny powers. And I think a lot more could be done in partnership with that panel. In some ways, that panel represents something of a succession to what used to be the old police authority. It has similar feel to it. I'm not saying we should go back to the old ways because there were some imperfections with that. Rallying it all around one individual, I suppose that's really a question for national government about what the Home Office thinks policing should be and how it should run. I'm sure we'll come on to this later, but I've got some problems with the approach that's like a US style approach to policing. We can talk about that in a bit if you like, but I think there's a better role for partnership. And so much of local and regional government is about partnership. It isn't all about one strong leader where everyone does what they're told.
And what can you bring as an independent that a candidate that's backed by a national party can't?
Well, that's something which really attracted me to independent politics in the first place. I'm a former civil servant. I really appreciated the idea that, I don't have to answer to a minister or a party or a central government person who are going to tell me what to do. I can genuinely act in the interest of residents and what I think is best rather than playing a party line.
Okay, so how much difference can a commissioner make to a police force's performance?
Well, actually, I'll quote the new Chief Constable for Surrey, who said to me in a closed session of the Police and Crime Panel that it is a question of leadership. I think that's very true. I've seen, certainly at national level, ministers who seem to be in power but not in control. I think it really is about leadership and about having the right values and the right attitude towards the sector and what needs to happen, coming in and building relationships, building partnerships, and again, not just doing what the party line tells you or having your team do the work for you. You have to actually lead the organisation.
But it must be a delicate relationship between the commissioner and the chief constable, mustn't it? Because the chief constable has the responsibility of leading his police force, and the commissioner has the responsibility of trying to guide the police force for the best outcome for the public. Do you think that's a natural relationship?
I mean, I think it's a good thing that there's tension built in there. I wouldn't want it to be too cozy. I think we've had problems in the past, particularly in policing, where relationships have been too cozy. I think it's similar to what you might have with a Secretary of State and a permanent secretary, a minister and a senior civil servant. You're always going to have some tension there. You're not going to be going out for beers together. That's the whole point, that you are able to hold someone to account, to deliver your political plans, and their job is to see that happen.
Now, conveniently, there was a report on Surrey Police published in December. What would you do to address the main weaknesses identified in that report? And perhaps you can highlight the ones that you think are the most important.
Well, the most important one is what's written on the tin. Surrey Police has been graded as inadequate at responding to the public. That is front and centre. You know, inadequate rating is very serious, but it's particularly serious that it's about responding to the public. If we go back to those old Pelian principles when police forces were first founded in this country, the public are the police and the police are the public. If your relationship with the public has broken down to the point where you're graded inadequate at responding, that's a serious problem. There's a number of things that can be done about that. I know that already there's a superintendent, I think chief superintendent, put in charge of the contact centre now. It's a shame that wasn't done before, because it's been known for, I'd say, at least 5, probably 6 or 7 years there are problems with response times to 101 in Surrey.
Yeah, forgive me for interrupting, but just so that listeners understand, in the report, the Inspector of Constabulary wrote, "I have serious concerns about how the force is responding to the public." Serious concerns, he said. "Surrey has a lower than average number of 999 calls and a comparatively low number of 101 calls. But despite this, the force doesn't always answer emergency and non-emergency calls in a timely way." I mean, this, from the public's point of view, is very important, isn't it? Because we want to be able to trust our police service so that when we pick up the phone and need help, we can get it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's more to unpack with this. So, for example, the contact centre would normally be staffed by police staff, not police officers, and there is a difference there. The current establishment numbers of police officers is 99%. There's been an uplift. We have as many police officers as we're supposed to have in Surrey. Not more, not less. It's about right. But the establishment for police staff is 88%. So there's a 12% vacancy rate. And it's that problem where you've got vacancies in the contact centre where police officers are abstracted from patrol, from response, from the streets where people want to see them but don't, into the contact centre to cover those vacant roles. That's a massive problem that goes back to an issue I have about funding. Now, the Police and Crime Commissioner is sitting on £43 million in Treasury management right now, and also underspent by £8.7 million last year, was on course to underspend by £3 million this year when we met in February to talk about the precept. And at that meeting, despite the panel voting against the maximum increase, the Police and Crime Commissioner put the council tax precept up by the maximum, despite sitting on lots and lots of money and underspending. I don't understand why those roles can't be filled if there's so much money sloshing around being put in reserves. You would think that we shouldn't be pleading poverty as a police service if there's that money and there's vacancies causing those problems. I think a lot of this goes into the issue with police funding. So Surrey, as you mentioned there, I have made an issue of this. It's the only area in the country where council taxpayers contribute more to policing than central government does, about 55%. I think this is an issue because if you look at, and I mentioned earlier, US-style policing, if you look at what happened in the United States with some towns and cities where you had capital flights, I think San Francisco was raised as a particular example with me. Lots of people moved out due to affordability issues. Because US policing is funded by a property tax, that means that funding goes down and you then have a gap in funding. Criminal gangs can exploit that. If you know an area is being defunded and there's less police and there's less money for police, that's an opportunity, and that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Probably the best example of that happening, the potential of that happening here, is Woking, where the council's been given permission to increase council tax by 10% while saying they probably won't be able to deliver any services. Even if they sold all of their assets, they still couldn't meet their funding gap. So you've got this issue here where Woking will probably not have as many people contributing council tax, because if you're a renter, you get out. The property market in Woking is probably in quite big trouble now, those big tower blocks that they've built. What's going to happen to the precept contribution? That, I think, should be happening more from central government, so there's less reliance.
Okay, but specifically then, if there's a problem of vacancies that are contributing to the overall problem of responding to, or poor response to the public, what would you be able to do as a commissioner to fix that?
Well, there is money there. You can spend that money to recruit.
But excuse me, but the salary levels are going to be key in attracting recruits, aren't they? And you can't change the salaries, can you?
Well, the chief constable can.
He can. Okay,
Well,
so you would argue that that's the solution.
Well, so for example, we know that the Met Police will put advertising in trains going into Surrey to recruit officers because they pay more. Surrey and Sussex have this joint force relationship, but
Yeah.
Sussex pays more than Surrey does.
Right.
So we're automatically the the poorer sibling in that relationship.
Okay, well, thank you. You've identified some things that you feel that could be done there. Now, can you remember the other two subjects that the inspector said requires improvement at Surrey?
Yes, let's go into that. So we know that recording data about crime is an issue and has been identified as requires improvement. There was a DIP sample of I think 50 where they found that 30 issues should have been recorded as crime and were not. At my first meeting of the police and crime panel in summer of last year, I asked questions about the force crime registrar who's responsible for recording data about crime. That would have been at the time the inspectors had been in the building. And I was told that they hadn't got any concerns because the PCC has a new data hub that she is using to talk about performance. Now, I think it's clear there were problems and there are issues there, and that, in fact, the way that crime is recorded is not being done properly. I did a little analysis in things like shoplifting, bike theft, things that perhaps weren't considered to be high priority, but the recording rates and the resolution rates are astonishingly low in those areas, and we know they're big issues. The third area, which perhaps is the most concerning, because if your requires improvement assessment, if you're graded as requires improvement, sorry, for looking after your own workforce, that's a serious problem. You're asking police officers to put their own safety at risk to protect you. And if you're not looking after those officers, that doesn't feel like the relationship we should have. There's been no wellbeing survey in 3 years. There are issues identified in the Peel assessment with bullying and racism and misogyny. That's a problem that lots of police forces have. But I think it's particularly concerning that it's been called out by the inspector, because it's not a large police force. There's not lots and lots of people working here. It's not that easy to hide. So that for me is a really serious concern. I think there should be more work done. I said there hasn't been a wellbeing survey. There should have been one. There should be more work done to look at culture and conduct. It's something that I'm doing at the moment as a piece of work with the Met Police on Casey Review and the Angiolini report. We know that intra-force vetting is a massive risk for police forces. If you're transferring between police forces, the bar is not as high as if you're becoming a police officer for the first time. This is the reason why the Met has had, I think, so many problems, because you can go in and out. And this has actually happened with Surrey and the Met Police a few times.
Okay, now there was a recent case in Bradford where someone who was reporting problems with behavior of their partner, and sadly the person was released and then murdered this woman. And yet in Surrey, we've also got this recording data about crime problem. Do you think that kind of risk rests in Surrey too?
Yes, well, I live in a borough that has had 2 domestic homicides in the last 5 years. And I've been part of the domestic homicide review for the second one, which was a very sad murder-suicide at a private school nearby with a shotgun. Having looked at the report on that, it's clear that there were opportunities there where the partnership agencies, the NHS and Surrey Police, were not able to access information clearly. I don't want to go into too much detail, but
No.
the more could have been done if information was shared better.
Okay. Because the inspector said, sorry to interrupt again, but the inspector said the force is too often failing to record sexual offences, particularly sexual assault and rape crimes. I mean, that's quite serious, isn't it?
It is serious, and it's something that was raised again when I first joined the police and crime panel. The rape charge rate in Surrey is, I think, the lowest in the country. It's really worrying that isn't being prioritised more importantly. And as you say, the missing sexual offences, missing issues and not recording issues properly. I talk about shoplifting and bike theft. They are important, but you would think the most important sorts of crimes, what I might call capital crimes, like rape, you'd think that was being prioritised. But according to the inspector, it's not. And it must be. It needs to be.
Okay. Now, members of the public often express the view that police are not visible enough, sometimes expressed as there should be more bobbies on the beat. Do you understand why they feel that? And if so, do you agree that increasing the number would be a good idea?
I do. It is a central plank of the campaign that I have. My slogan, if you like, is "More police keeping you safe where you live." And the Bobby's on the beat phrase has come up a few times. And I've said, we can't have a Dixon of Dock Green style situation. We're not living in the 1950s. Populations are different, behaviours are different. But people do feel safer when they see a police presence. And there are simple things that could be done, like parking a squad car at each end of the high street, because fleet has to go somewhere. There's police fleet vehicles. Often they're renting spaces at town hall car parks. Why not put them at each end of your high street so that you have some sense of police presence? It's not a big deal to ask police to walk the high street or to walk residential areas now and then, especially where you've got data about crime and there's a problem with burglary or car theft in a particular area. Why not do a sundowner, walk down that neighbourhood street where there's a problem with car theft as the sun goes down, because it will reassure people. They'll get a sense that police are around and providing a visible presence. And it deters. We know it deters. We know that if you're driving down a street and you see a police officer with a speed gun, you're going to slow down. We know it happens.
Okay, thank you. And now you wrote in a recent opinion piece that you submitted to the Dragon that Surrey Police is the most reliant force on council tax in the country. Why is that? And is it a problem?
Well, I jumped the gun a little bit earlier talking about that, but I think it is a problem because in 2018, there was a parliamentary review into police funding. And they looked at the spectrum where you've got Surrey at one end and Northumbria at the other end. Northumbria gets about 80%, 75–80% of its funding from central government, and the rest is from the precept share of council tax. Surrey's at the other end, where it's 50%, 55%, sorry, government funding and 45% council precept. If you're very reliant on local tax, that does two things. It means that if you have people moving out of that area, especially renters, and we know that housing affordability is an issue in Surrey, and renters might move further afield from Surrey, that means your share of council tax can be affected. In other words, police could be defunded by accident, by movement of people. And secondly, from a social justice point of view, if you are paying, if you're a poor person in a wealthy area, for lack of a better phrase, you should expect to see that expect isn't the right word, probably mangling my words a bit here. There was a social mobility commission piece of work in 2018 by Alan Milburn that showed if you are poor in a wealthy area, you are less likely to have services targeted towards you than if you're poor in a poor area. Surrey is one of the wealthiest areas in the country, and I feel that there's a social justice element to people who pay very high council tax, and we pay the highest council tax in the UK. For example, on a Band F home, you're paying more council tax than the King does on Buckingham Palace. If you're paying very high council tax but not getting the services, that doesn't seem fair, particularly if you're living in deprivation. Even on a Band A, B, C, D home, you're paying more. So there is an element there of the government rinsing wealthy counties for money, and then the police not getting what I feel is a fair share of those services.
I understand. Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, is there anything else you'd like to say that might persuade voters you are the best candidate?
I want to see more visible policing. I want to see more partnership work. I want to see police working with other agencies. And I want to see the pride and professionalism of policing brought back again. There's a lot of officers and retired officers living in Surrey that I've met with and spoken to who will put their head in their hands about where policing has gone over the last decade and a half of austerity, because it used to be what was described as the best job in the world. Very respectful, very well regarded. And now I don't feel like it has that cachet. It doesn't have that currency to it of being a fantastic job. Whereas so many officers that I've met have said, what a great job it was when they worked there. And they would like to see that pride and professionalism back again. But it's going to mean that we need to commit the money. And that's what I'm saying I would do. There is quite a bit of money sat around not being used. We can put public money, your money, to better use to bring our police service up to the quality I feel it should be. And I am the candidate that wants to do that, but I need to get elected first.
Alex Coley, thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.